Hello everybody, welcome to more Political Excess. Today let's do a weekly poll recap with 6 weeks to go. Let's see what's been going on the last few days. So let's get on Real Clear Politics. And first off, we've got some polls for Wisconsin Governor and Senate. They're from Trafalgar, and they are with 1,087 likely voters for their sample size. And they're showing Ron Johnson with a 2-point lead over Mandela Barnes, 49 to 47%. And the governor's side, Tim Michels has a 1-point lead, 48 to 47 over incumbent Democrat Tony Evers. This is the first poll that does show Tim Michels ahead, so there might be a shift happening there. Still too early to tell. On the Senate side, there has been a few polls out now that show Ron Johnson with a slight edge. I do expect Johnson to win, but this is starting to show he has a little bit of momentum. Next up, we've got polls out of Arizona from Fabrizio Anzalone. This is with 500 likely voters, and they polled the U.S. Senate and the governor's race. This shows Mark Kelly with a healthy 8-point lead, 50 to 42 over Blake Masters, and Katie Hobbs with a narrow 1-point lead, 49 to 48 over Carrie Lake. If you click on these individual polls, it does present the information visually well and has a good layout if you want to look more into those details. There is one more poll here from OH Predictive Insights for U.S. Senate in Arizona. This shows Mark Kelly with an even wider 12-point lead, 47 to 35. That 12-point margin seems like an outlier based on everything else. I know there's been a lot of debate over Arizona and the U.S. Senate in terms of funding and Mitch McConnell pulling out of the funding. To me, it makes sense that McConnell would not want to back someone that is much more likely to not fall into line and back the establishment. I think on both sides, that might be a good thing. Doesn't mean Masters is going to lose, but I do think Mark Kelly has an advantage. But I'm not sure what type of margin this race is going to have in the end. And on the governor's side, I think Carrie Lake is in the driver's seat. And most of the polling has shifted toward Lake over the past couple of weeks. This one here shows Hobbs in the lead. Maybe she is, but I do think Mark Kelly is going to run ahead of Katie Hobbs. Next, we've got a poll out of Utah for U.S. Senate that has incumbent Mike Lee up only 5 points, 40 to 35, over Evan McMullin, who is an independent who's aligned this time with the Democrats. I think this makes it look much closer than it will actually be. 40 to 35, those are very low totals. And in the end, I think Lee will win that rather comfortably. And plus, that poll was only taken with 801 registered voters. Next up, we've got a poll for Maine governor from Emerson. This is with 1,164 likely voters. It does show Janet Mills with a very comfortable 12-point lead, 53 to 41 over former Governor Paul LePage. Emerson is usually a decent pollster. I do think Mills is favored, not by 12 points. Paul LePage is going to have some ground to make up on that one if he actually wants to make it truly competitive. I do hope we get more polls for Maine down the stretch. I don't want to see just 2 or 3 more. I want to see a lot of polls out of Maine. And we've got the standard Biden approval rating, congressional ballot, Trump versus Biden polls. Not really interested in those for this video. Let's go down to Thursday, and we've got some Nevada U.S. Senate polls. Inside Advantage has Adam Laxalt up 3, 46 to 43 over Catherine Cortez Masto, and Trafalgar has Laxalt up 4, 47 to 43. The Insider Advantage poll had 550 likely voters. Trafalgar used about double that sample size. Maybe they do have a Republican slant. It is definitely possible. I think Laxalt probably does have a very slight edge. I would say it's under 3 or 4 points. I think it's more like 1 point. But that race is still up in the air. This is good news for Laxalt, but it is Nevada. Sometimes the polls are off. And if Cortez Masto ends up winning this race in the end by 4 or 5 points, I really would not be that surprised. Trafalgar also polled the governor's race there. That has Joe Lombardo up 3 points, 48 to 45 over Steve Sisolak. I think Sisolak is probably in a better position than Cortez Masto. Both of these races are going to be very close. I would expect each race to be within 2, maybe 3 points either way. Next up, we've got polls for Pennsylvania governor and Senate. That is from Morning Call. I'm not overly familiar with them. I think that is a local news outlet in Pennsylvania. But that does show John Fetterman up 5 points, 49 to 44 over Dr. Oz. And in the governor's race, Josh Shapiro is up big, 11 points, 53 to 42 over Doug Mastriano. That was taken with 420 likely voters, so not the biggest sample size. And I'm not sure what to make of some of these polls. The Senate race does appear to be solidly within single digits, maybe low to mid-single digits at this point. On the governor's side, there's polls all over the place. They're in double digits, and then there's some closer to low single digits. I think some voters there are still waiting till the end to make their decision. Some of them might be holdouts for Dr. Oz, possibly Doug Mastriano as well, if they're going to vote straight Republican ticket. So this race could and probably will get extremely close by Election Day, but at this point you'd still rather be the Democrats than the Republicans. I hope to see a ton more polling out of Pennsylvania. I would love to get at least 4 or 5 polls a week for each of these races. Next, we've got polls out of Colorado from The Hill, teaming up with Emerson. And in the U.S. Senate race, Michael Bennet has a 10-point lead, 46-36 over Joe O'Dea. And Jared Polis, he's up pretty big, 17 points, 53-36 over Heidi Ganahl. I don't disagree with who is in the lead there. It probably seems like the Democrats would win by 3 or 4 points less than that, especially with the Republicans only at 36% for the U.S. Senate. The Democrats are winning those seats. To me, the only real question is, will it be over or under 10 points? Next, we've got more polls from University of New Hampshire for their Senate and congressional races. With an 870-vote sample size, Maggie Hassan, the incumbent Democrat, is up 8 points, 49-41 over Don Bolduc. And with a 423-vote sample size in that first congressional district, Chris Pappas is up 7 points, 50-43 over Caroline Leavitt. In the second district, Ann McLean Custer is up 3, 48-45 over Robert Burns. I do expect more of these UNH polls to drop for these races, but I think I'm more surprised here that Chris Pappas has a 7-point lead in the slightly redder district. Maybe Caroline Leavitt has made some missteps already that I'm unaware of, and maybe in that second district Burns is running a great campaign and Custer is flailing. And in the U.S. Senate race, Don Bolduc is indeed the underdog. An 8-point deficit is not something he can't make up, but it seems like at this point he would run out of time and still lose by a couple points or so. Next up is for Michigan governor, with 600 likely voters from the Detroit Free Press. Gretchen Whitmer is up really big, 16 points, 55-39 over Tudor Dixon. So either Gretchen Whitmer is shaping up to win this in a blowout, way over double digits, or there's an oversampling of Democrats. I would not expect this race to be over 10 points. I can't rule it out if the polls are going to consistently show that, but I don't think Dixon would only get 39% of the vote. And next up, we've got a Texas governor's poll from Siena. It shows Greg Abbott up 7 points, 50-43 over Beto O'Rourke. That's pretty much in line with most of the other polls we've seen for Texas governor. Abbott is clearly favored in that race. So next up, back on Wednesday, we've got some polls out of Florida. With 500 likely voters, Marco Rubio is up 4 points, 45-41 over Val Demings, and Ron DeSantis is up 7 over Charlie Crist. On its face, those seem to be more or less in line with what I expect. I personally don't see either of those races super competitive. So let's move down to this Marist poll for Ohio Senate and Governor. With a 1,009 likely voter sample size, J.D. Vance is up 1 point, 48-47 over Tim Ryan. And Mike DeWine is up 16, 55-39 over Nan Whaley. Everybody expects DeWine to outperform Vance, and most people expect Vance to win it by at least a few points. I think it should probably be by a likely margin in the end, but as of now, Tim Ryan is at least making it interesting enough to talk about. Next, we've got more Georgia Senate and Governor polls from CBS News, YouGov. That is with 1,178 likely voters, and in that one, Warnock is up 2, 51-49 over Walker, and Brian Kemp is up 6, 52-46 over Stacey Abrams. In the last few weeks, we've seen Kemp with a stable lead, and we've seen that Senate race go back and forth. I still think it's close to a coin flip. It could go to a runoff, and hopefully we get at least one debate. Next, we've got some Kansas polls. And for the U.S. Senate, Jerry Moran is up 12, 45-33 over Mark Holland. I don't think anyone disagrees that Jerry Moran is going to win that race, but the governor's side, that one is supposed to be competitive. And in that one, Laura Kelly is up 2, 45-43 over Derek Schmidt. I think in the end, Schmidt should be able to narrowly squeak by at least, but as of now, it's a close race, and Kelly is not entirely out of it. There's a couple Quinnipiac polls for U.S. Senate and Governor in Connecticut. Both Richard Blumenthal and Ned Lamont are up 17 points, 57 to 40 over their Republican challengers. I would expect the governor's race to be narrower than the Senate race, but either way, the Democrats are likely to win for governor and nearly certain to win for U.S. Senate. Here's another UNH poll for New Hampshire governor. No surprise there. Chris Sununu is up huge, 18 points, 55 to 37 over Tom Sherman. Last time he won by a much wider margin than 18. Maybe this time it narrows up to under 20, or maybe in the end, Sununu ends up pulling it out by over 20. If we go back to Tuesday, we've got more polls for Wisconsin and Georgia. Definitely take a look at these if you're interested in these races. I'm not going to go into each poll, but the theme is more or less the same. Wisconsin and Georgia, they're close races. They could go either way, with the exception of Brian Kemp. He is favored to win. There's also a North Carolina U.S. Senate poll. Shows Ted Budd up 3 points, 46 to 43 over Sherry Beasley. That seems to be close to what I expect it to be. And here's a Minnesota governor's poll. Tim Walz is up 3 points, 48 to 45 over Scott Jensen. That could end up being a narrow race in the end. I think Walz does have a clear advantage, but there is time for Scott Jensen to gain some more momentum. And here is a Missouri U.S. Senate poll, and that shows Eric Schmidt up 11 points, 47 to 36 over Trudy Bush Valentine. That seems perfectly reasonable without even looking at any additional details. And real quick, on Monday, there is polling for Maryland Senate and Governor. Both of those show the Democrats up over 20 points. There's no need to really look into those. That's close to what I expect. It might be under 20 points, possibly even under 15 in the end. But the Democrats are going to win both of those pretty much for sure. And there is a poll for the U.S. House in Michigan's 7th Congressional District. That shows Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat, up massive 18 points, 56 to 38 over Tom Barrett. That was with 500 likely voters. That's something to look into, to take a look at the crosstabs. I would not expect either candidate in that district to win by over 10 points, pretty much under any circumstances. But that does bode well for Slotkin. And that takes us over to 538, where they have additional U.S. House races. So you can look at these if you'd like. There's Illinois, there's Washington, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Utah. They're all on here if you want to look. A lot of them are sponsored by the campaigns themselves. The sample sizes are smaller, so I wouldn't put a ton of stock into them, but they're not completely useless either. They can show you which way the winds might be blowing in an individual district. So I will leave it at that, and that concludes another weekly poll recap. Let me know in the comments if you have anything to say about any of these polls we covered here. Does this change anything for any of these competitive races? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.